Hello, everybody. It is great to have you back with the Holistic Hive podcast. I am Dr. Christina Stitcher.
I'm Dr. Lawrence Hopley.
And we are thrilled to have Meredith Cohen with us. She is a force to be reckoned with, doula for many years, working on project number 3 for her home right now. And then also, and one of the big reasons that we really want to sit down is you have a whole little passion project that you have not only worked on, but now is coming to fruition. So can you first introduce yourselves to the holistic community and tell us who you are, what you do, and then a little bit about this, where we want to go today.
Yes. So I'm Meredith Ashton Cohen, and I've been a birth doula for about 6 years now. I love being on the birth side, so I haven't done a lot of postpartum work, so I love the birth work. That's really like where my heart is. And then I'm also a menstruation educator, doing my women's health coaching training. And really it's centered around the menstrual cycle. So we'll talk a lot about that today.
So let's dive in.
Okay.
So the first thing I'd say is when it comes to, let me start age appropriate.
Okay.
When is the best time to start talking with your kids about healthy, what to expect, menstruation? Like, where do you want to start?
Honestly, I have a 2 and a 4-year-old, and like they know that mom bleeds sometimes, and they know that it doesn't mean that I'm hurt, and they, my 4-year-old pulled out a tampon, and she's like, do you need this? And I'm like, oh, I don't bleed while I have a baby in my tummy. So there's already like those conversations happening that I think will lead into, oh, and one day you, my daughter, will also bleed too, and let's talk about what that means. So, and as I've talked with other moms, they have their son that's like, oh, this is my mom's cup, it catches her blood. So I think there's not a too soon time to start talking about it.
Yeah, no, that was what I was expecting. I look at this because I think sometimes it's funny, and I think I'll poke on the men for just a moment. It's like how many guys are just like, they're still, I'm not sure. And it's like, really? I have to laugh. I think it's one thing I'm going, it's normal, obviously. It's part of health. I think that's the other thing, is I think for so many women, I guess that's a fun one to have, is so many women, it's like, it's my period. Where would you go there?
I think so, because the women feel that way, that's the conversation that they have with their partners. So their partners also dread the period every month. And then it passes down to the kids. So this whole family is like, ooh, yeah, that thing that happens, we don't like it. So then that perpetuates in our culture where it's like, how can we stop it? How can we pretend like it's not happening? How can we just avoid all that yucky stuff? But then there's a lack of education in like what's going on and then how to effectively handle it. Whereas like, if we went the opposite way, and it really starts with like the women owning that and then being able to communicate with their partner about it, and then it becomes just, this is part of health, this is part of our bodies, this is an amazing part of how we bring children into the world, this is how it goes, and kind of takes away the emotional charge around it, because I think there's a lot of emotional charge that keeps it in the closet.
So where do people start? Like, where do people, when they start like taking these classes with you, I'm assuming they're at all realms. They're either starting or different ages, but also probably a whole bunch of different emotions coming into. So where do you kind of start? Like, what's your square one? What do you like for people to either appreciate or start in?
Yeah, really good question. So I've been teaching classes for teenagers and their moms. It's the most comfortable door to go in. And if you have 2 together that can support each other in the house, then from there, then you can get the rest of the family on board. So then they kind of have a language to talk about and a platform to go back to. And so really like I talk about the basics. Like, this is why you have a period. This is why, and I give 3 reasons. Like, it's the fertility reason. This is how babies come. This is the process of that. But it's also like so important for your short and your long-term health. Like, every one of your body systems depends on the hormones that you make in your menstrual cycle. It's like, if you want to have strong bones, have a healthy menstrual cycle. If you want to have your brain and have longevity and plasticity in your brain, like, have a healthy menstrual cycle. But then there's also this like creativity and spirituality to the menstrual cycle where it actually can be like a guide for us to receive inspiration about who we are and where we're headed in our life and what our purpose and what our calling is, that's also like really beautiful. So there's all these like layers to unpack, but we obviously start with like the physical, because I'm talking with like 11 to 18-year-olds about like, here's what's happening in your body. But did you also know that there's all these other layers where it can be just a really amazing source for you to like come into yourself, you know, so.
So when someone starts at that point, what is the goal? Like, what is the goal to take them to?
The goal is always to start tracking their cycle.
Okay.
And there's lots of apps, and surprisingly, like more teenagers, like in my classes, I'm like, who already tracks their cycle? And actually most of them do. So, but they track their period, which is great. It's like, yes, know when your period is coming. And they're like, oh, sometimes I do and sometimes I forget. It's like, okay, we'll just start doing that every month. And then start adding in these couple things. And then start noticing how you feel throughout your cycle and the emotions that come and the cravings that come and when your troublesome days are. And it's okay to have troublesome days, you know, but then also you can turn to food, you can turn to lifestyle, you can turn to getting more rest, you can turn to stress management to manage your troublesome days so that your symptoms will go down and you can actually enjoy your period. Which it's kind of mind-blowing to say like PMS is optional and that there are things you can do. They're like, wait a second, what? It's like, no, we weren't created to suffer once a month. That doesn't make sense. So, yeah, so I think it's tracking their period. I teach them about tracking their ovulation, and that's kind of the next step. But obviously that happens, you know, once their period is pretty regular after the first few years. So,
and let's go there. So how common is it and normal? I guess we'll get rid of those two words. There's common and there's normal.
I know.
So what is the normal, so a girl is starting into a period, what can be expected for regularity?
It's pretty irregular for the first 2 years. Give it the first 2, even 3 years, because estrogen is brand new to the body. So I always talk about like, it's like moving to a new city and you're driving on new roads, and sometimes you take a U-turn and you don't really know where you're going, so it takes you longer to get to your destination. And that's what estrogen is doing. And so give it a chance to learn its routes. And it's not until, and the periods aren't ovulatory during those first couple of years. So once a girl starts ovulating, then you get the progesterone that comes into balance with the estrogen, and those two working hand in hand, and finding that balance is really where you're like in smooth sailing mode, you know, so that's kind of what happens. So moms that freak out or doctors that freak out in the first is like, oh my gosh, their period is irregular, they need to go on the birth control pill. It's like, that's the worst thing that you could do. You've got to give your hormones a chance.
Okay, so extrapolate on that, because there's so many people and I still see, and I thought it had gone away, that it was like we would not regulate hormones with artificial hormones at the very beginning. So explain why birth control pills at the onset of menses is like the worst thing you can do.
Okay, so the birth control pill has the synthetic estrogen and synthetic progesterone. So they come in and they shut down the ovulation process, they shut down the whole cycle, and they run the show. But the problem with that is that when our bodies aren't making the hormones, then our bodies don't get the benefits of the hormones, like building our bones, brain, breast health, heart health, all the major systems that rely on the estrogen and progesterone. They don't get any of the benefits. And so it's actually not, so you're not ovulating, you're not really having a cycle. The bleed that comes is a withdrawal from the medication, from the synthetic hormones, not from the lining building up and then shedding each month. So then the hormones, like they need those first few years to be able to regulate and find themselves and work their way out in the body. That's why like the teenage can be so awkward, because the hormones are also like learning their routes. You know, they don't come in knowing what to do. They have these markers in the body figures it out because we're wise and we're smart, if we were to just get out of the way of our bodies. Right, which is always the message. It's like, let our bodies like do the thing, and there will be some like ungraceful times, but they will figure it out. So if you were to shut down that whole process, then you don't get all the benefits physically with the body, but then if you want to go off the birth control pill, and if you do want to get pregnant, then your body has lost all that ground, and your hormones are like starting from zero because they never had a chance to find out what to do. And so then it's like, good luck with fertility, good luck with health, good luck with all the things that come, because now your body's that much older and it hasn't had the experience of ovulating on its own.
So we look at, I look at this as like a cautionary thing for moms more so than anyone, and for the girls, to say, hey, like, your friend may have a very regular period and you don't. It's okay.
Yes.
Get out of your own way. Let your body do its thing. Know that it's learning this process right now, and honor that process, because anytime, I always joke, anytime we think we're wiser than the body,
that's trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Like that will not go well for us at some point, and you will have consequences. And so anytime that we can honor support and help, and I think that's like, so it takes me back to, this is why you want people tracking, because then they're more aware.
Yes. So every, there's kind of like this range of normal of like what a normal healthy period looks like, but it's just like our fingerprints, like each woman's period is going to be different. So you can't really compare. And so tracking your own cycle and learning what your own period looks like and how much a heavy flow is for you, and how much, when your days come, and then learning when you ovulate. And that can change period to period, month over month. And then also like from, person to person. So that's the value. It's like, okay, tracking and being aware of the physical signs, but then it goes to like really taking ownership of like this, it's that awareness of like, this is what my body is doing, this is what's normal for me, and this is the day that I don't talk to anybody because I can't be anything but just bitchy. So, and just knowing that, so then that becomes an empowering way to live in your cycle rather than, comparing, to other people. So, yeah.
So then as someone's going into, let's go out of teenage years, they're going to their early 20s, they're still having a period that's not a normal cycle. What would you say at that point, or what would you suggest at that point?
This is where, like, if you're tracking, you can be your own detective to go back and say, how many days am I bleeding? Is it a heavy flow that I'm dealing with? Is this severe pain? And then using those symptoms as messages to then detect what's going on. So that's where I think a holistic provider can come in, and a health coach is really useful to kind of put the puzzle pieces together, as far as like, this is what heavy bleeding could be paired with severe cramps. Probably you have a little bit more estrogen, so we need to make sure that that's metabolizing. All right, so then let's look at your diet, and let's go with food as medicine, and let's do some other lifestyle factors. Or if there's, psychosis that comes with periods, or if there's like severe depression, then that could be a PMDD, that could be a condition that you would then want to pull in like a naturopathic doctor or somebody to work with, a health coach to kind of approach that. But it all starts with like the data, right? Of like, these are my symptoms, and this is what's happening, and this is how I'm feeling. And if you can give that data to a health coach and a doctor, it's like, oh, you can solve so many things fast and effectively, using more holistic approaches.
Absolutely. And when you look at it, it's really one of, like you said, it's empowering these women to know their body, and also to say, okay, something still isn't adding up, but I can appreciate the journey in it and get the information. And then, because I love this, it's like most people are going to think, depending on what age their child is, they're going to run right to the pediatrician and have the medical approach, which is going to be often, it's like their hands are tied, and let's just be honest, it's like their hands are tied within their training, is they're going to look at what pharmaceutical do we have to go to. And so when we're dealing with hormones, they're looking at birth control. Where, and there's now a whole, and I say now, but it's been around, but a whole field of functional medicine, where we're now looking at what is ideal, what's normal, what is truly normal, what is healthy. And so you can find those providers, but if you can't bring the data, instead you just say, well, my period's irregular and I get mad and I don't know, it's like, then now you're spending months trying to track this with them rather than already coming with it.
Yes, exactly. So that's the value in tracking from the very first period. It's like, when should a girl start tracking her period? From the very first one.
Okay.
And even if it's, oh, I got my period this year and it didn't come until 6 months later, it's like, you want to know that data, or if you have a period, if you have already started, then start that day tracking, right away, because that's really where you start. You say, I don't know, I kind of bleed for like 7 days and it's super heavy, and it may feel super heavy, but unless you're tracking and maybe working with a parent or like a guide from the home that can be like, oh yeah, that's pretty normal, or like, oh yeah, that is a lot of blood, and let's, talk about it, or let's watch it, and kind of that observing and really tracking and knowing what's going on. Yeah, so you can be your own detective, right? Instead of handing over your health to the healthcare system, which will most likely turn to pharmaceuticals.
Right.
Yeah.
So then what about transition into motherhood? What starts changing within cycles as we've conceived, had our babies, postpartum? Like, what is pretty normal to expect for women as they're going through childbearing years, but then even gearing up into premenopausal, menopausal?
Yeah. It's kind of like how your cycle, if you've had a regular, pretty healthy cycle, you will move through these stages pretty gracefully, because you have the foundation of ovulatory cycles, which provide the hormones to regulate themselves and keep going. And for some women, after they have children, their cycles regulate and they have less symptoms. And for some women, after they have babies, they have more symptoms, or their heavy bleeding never goes away. But you want to look at how were the cycles before this, before the childbearing came, what was the fertility journey like? So I think that's where it's like putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So ideally, every woman's period comes back at different times, depending on breastfeeding, has a big, play on when the bleeding comes back postpartum. But menopause, like perimenopause, like starts in your 40s, right? Like 40, and it just starts, so kind of like there's this ramping up time with your period, a couple years. It slows down in your 40s to head towards menopause. So it's not like you approach menopause and all of a sudden you stop bleeding one day. But the hormones start to slow down and you start to transition, and the periods get lighter, they get farther apart from each other until you reach menopause, which is a whole year of no periods, cessation at that point. So
let's go to the myth of, because I have to go there.
What is it?
Well, I'm thinking with breastfeeding and babies, and as a form of birth control, because I think that's a really important thing to bring up. Because a lot of partners, a lot of women, a lot of parents are saying, well, aren't you still nursing? You should be good to go. And a lot of people assume I haven't had a period. So if I haven't had a period, then that must mean I'm not ovulating.
No, this is where knowing your ovulation signs is independent of the breastfeeding journey. And so there's a fertility awareness method of birth control, which is basically tracking your ovulation signs. And when you're fertile, then you don't try to make a baby. If you don't want a baby, or you're doing preventative measures during your fertile window. So it's really like that foundation of knowing your ovulation signs, so your cervical mucus, your cervical changes, your basal body temperature. So there's signs that our bodies give that let us know about the ovulation. So it's really ovulation that is the part that you really want to know about your body, and be tracking that. And if there's any hesitation and you do not want another pregnancy, then, prevent as you choose.
Yep.
So, yes.
I think
yes, play it safe. If you don't want another pregnancy, what do they say about fertility awareness? It's like if there's an oops and what do you call it? It's like, oh, you parents.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I look at it because I think I'm hoping that the conversation's opening up. and that more girls are being empowered in having a period and having a menstrual cycle, and not just a period, because I think there's so many times we talk about the period, but we're not talking about the cycle. And I love that we immediately started out saying, no, we got to track the cycle, because there's so much that's happening within it, and then you're more aware of your body. I think that's one of the biggest things I'm seeing in society, and maybe it's because of who I choose to be around, is this going inward and this awareness of what is my body doing, rather than thinking it's weak, sick, diseased, dying, so I want to ignore it and shut it away. It's like, no. It's inherently intelligent and smart. And if we get out of our own way, it knows what to do, but I'd like to learn more about it. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really one of going, I'm curious, are you seeing a conversation change as well, or change within girls, or is this something that you start these classes and you get to demystify the whole thing and then break through?
I think it's a lot of just education of like, oh, good to know. Oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's why this is. So they're feeling these things, as these young teenagers and navigating this thing. And it's still not a super open topic, but a lot more of the moms are like, oh yeah, we talk about this all the time. Or like, oh, I have an older sister, so they just learn from seeing it. And same with me, I have older sisters, so I'd hear about, oh, blood on the sheets and how to clean up blood and things like that. So it's just like, oh yeah, my mom was pretty graceful as far as like, oh yeah, we just handle it and take care of it, because that's part of a normal process of having girls and having a female body. So I think it's more open, and I think girls are feeling like they can just say like, oh yeah, I'm on my period, but I think there's still like the mystification of like, oh, then we don't want to like go there, instead of like offering the support and like, how can I support you today? That gentle like turning. But I think it comes also from the girls saying like, this is what I need. And if you know how you're gonna feel and you can speak up for your needs, like that's pretty powerful to start just being able to voice what you need as your hormones change in your cycle. That's pretty empowering.
So how can dads help?
I love this question. I actually have a course for dads,
Sweet.
And it came out of this class. And I was in this business class, and this like lawyer raised his hand. He's like, "So what's out there for me?" And I was like, "I have something just for you." One thing is like asking those questions of just, how are you today? How are you feeling? I think having your own education about the cycle and, specifically like the 4 phases and how their hormones change can give you just kind of a basis.
Sure.
And then that awareness of like, oh, this is kind of about where my daughter is. If you have a female partner, then she can also be a bridge to that. But I think there's also this like body image resilience that you can also instill in your daughters by really, it's not always complimenting them on their appearance, but what their bodies can do.
Okay.
And, that their body is healthy and this is normal and it looks like you're having a tough day and I'm here to support you. So those gentle reminders, because they probably don't want to like talk about their flow with you or like go to you to buy tampons or anything like that. But they do want to know that you recognize and that you're there to offer support.
Sure.
So I think one of the things is like staying away from any negative derogatory comments about their bodies, about their cycles, about their periods can be really helpful, so that they see that you have a positive outlook. Like that can make a big difference, that like, oh, dad doesn't feel negatively about this, mom doesn't either. Okay, then I can probably be okay with this. So I think that foundation is really, really key.
Excellent. Yeah.
Love that. So I would, quick question on different options and really where to start for teenagers, because we have pads, tampons, cups, things like that are utilized. Where do you really recommend further? I'm thinking again more mom. Like where can you say for mom, okay, here's where you really can start your daughters, and based on, and like what are we looking for of when we can introduce maybe a cup or a tampon and things like that.
Yeah. The beauty is we have like all of these menstrual products. Go organic cotton when you can. So pads and tampons, because they are made with chemicals, and that can like create a rash. You might be like, oh, is this a yeast infection? And it's like switch to either like cloth or reusable pads, or organic cotton and see if that clears things up. So it might be a chemical in the conventional pad or tampon.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's like, what is your daughter involved in? Is she a swimmer? Is she an athlete? Is she a dancer? Like all of these things, and what activities is she involved in, and what kind of flow does she have? So I think, in my classes, it's like we lay all the products out on the table and be like, look at all these options. And if you have a heavy day and you want to wear a tampon, but then you have the period panties so that you're feeling like you have peace of mind to go take your test in your class, then that's going to serve you really well. So you can double up on that day. Oh, if you have a light day and you just wear your period panties, or you just have a panty liner, it's like different, you have different tools. You have a whole toolbox available to you. So I think it's looking at the lifestyle. For girls that haven't started and it's like, what do I do? It's like, put 2 pads and a change of underwear in a little like cute bag that they can keep in their backpack. And then you teach them just how to use a pad. And so if that's a starting place, it's just like, oh, I always have that in my bag. I know that I might start soon because I'm 12. And when I do, then if I get out my underwear, then I change my underwear and I put a pad on, and then I go home and I talk to my mom. So it's like those first, they're going to be at school, so then you kind of handle that chunk of time. And it's a really simple way to begin.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I also love that you mentioned the period panties, because so cool that these are now options.
I know.
I look at so many things and I'm like, man, this needed to be around beforehand. Yeah. And so there's so many opportunities for our teenagers and for our kids that we may not have known about and everything else. And so we look at this and going, I love what's happening is we're making it more convenient. We're making it more going, no, this is to work within your life. I love this. Like, no, what is your lifestyle? And the very last thing I want for my daughter is to be limited and feel like it's a limitation.
Yeah.
Because that's the last thing we ever want, is to go, no, this is a wonderful part of life, and what is setting your body up for health and for future, however you choose to go down your paths, but we want you to be able to explore life fully now as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it provides that. I have this cute teenager. She's like, can I delay my period a week because we're going on a cruise? I'm like, okay, well, no. I mean, there are things that you could do, but probably not advisable. But look at all these options that you have to feel prepared, and knowing that you're going to be on your period on the cruise, use that time accordingly. It's kind of like, if it's snowing outside, then pull out your snow gear.
Right.
And you'll have a much better time out in the snow. Yeah.
So if you had to give advice, I'm going to have you give advice, because you've already kind of done it, but I'm going to have you kind of capture it, in 1, maybe 2 sentences. What would you say to someone who's just starting into their period and starting into their cycle?
Track your cycle, track your period, first and foremost, every single time. And if it's just your period that you track and the symptoms and the time with that, start with that. The next step would be tracking your ovulation, but it's about, the next layer is tuning into your body and how you feel about your period. And if you really don't like it, it's okay. Have all of those feelings about your period, because it may feel yucky and it may feel great and it may be easy and it may be hard. And just being aware of all of those feelings that also come with it, to just allow them to be there as well. So
great. I like that.
Yeah.
Now you have someone who's listening who says, I've never tracked my period. I don't even want to know when my Shark Week is happening. So they have this built up around it.
Sure.
Yeah. So what advice would you give them?
Oh, track your period.
Okay, I thought so. But it's start the process now.
Start the process now, and find something that's really easy and convenient so that you can stick with it. So if that's a phone app, or if that's a calendar, or if that's a cycle chart.
Do you have a favorite phone app?
No.
Okay.
Period tracking is kind of pick your pleasure.
Right.
If you're fertility tracking, then there's some things that, offer that.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on what you're looking for, so I'm in the fertility phase of my life, so I like that. But there's lots of period tracking, and they're all cute and animated. They're built for girls, teenage girls. And how do you feel today? You can just pick your smiley face or your frowny face.
Yeah.
And, so I think for somebody that really doesn't want to know, it's it's going to come calling to you. It's like we're always in a season, whether it's summer and fall, and so it's like you can't pull yourself out of it. I mean, you could like have a medically induced hysterectomy and things like that. Yeah. But as long as it's there, it's like it's always going to be calling you. And it's like this tremendous gift. And so but it's waiting for you to really open it and use it, and so as long as you don't want to do that, then you're missing out on all of the wonderful things that it can bring. And so it will be easier, it's much more happy to live with your cycle than just to pretend that it's not happening. So it's kind of like having a friend, and I love like this quote that I always read at the beginning of my classes. It's like, I said to my body softly, I want to be your friend. And it took a long sigh and said, I've been waiting my whole life for this. It's like, it's waiting for you to be its friend. And when you're its friend, it befriends you back tenfold. So it's a really, really beautiful.
And I think as you're saying that, I think it would help unpack some emotions that could be emotionally charged into a cycle. Realizing that if you are going to have kids, then you could pass, without meaning to, you could pass some of those bias onto your child. And children, it doesn't matter male or female. It's like we really want to acknowledge where we are and unpack our own luggage and reset it. So I think it's a beautiful way of saying, start now.
Yeah, it's like you'll pass on the beliefs, right, and the epigenetics of how you've like dealt with your cycle, but also like the symptoms too, right? Like as we befriend our cycles, like our symptoms start to like fall to the wayside because we're paying attention. And it's like, oh, if a friend is crying, then your response is like, are you okay? What can I do for you? Oh, I'm having like really bad cramps. Okay, then I need to go rest today. And your body's like, thank you so much. I was trying to give you that message. And so there's also that. And so like even physically symptoms start to unleash, and like just start to fall and diminish. So it's pretty cool that way.
Awesome. And so then I'm gonna say, let's do parents, because I know you hit dads really well, which I love. What would you say to parents as they're like, okay, like she's 10, 11, we're right into that period. Yeah. What would you just say to parents as they're knowing the journey's about to start?
Take my class and take my course for dads. Dads, you can do it separately on your own time. You don't even have to be in the same room. I made it specifically so easy, so you can just come out and be like, oh yeah, I got this. I'm totally like the hero, and you're gonna be like, yes, my dad just knows me. He just knows what to say. So I think parents, it's like, yeah, this is, and if you've been talking about it, then it's a really graceful transition. So you can have a formal sit down and be like, all right, kids, we're just talking about this process, and we're just talking about it now. You don't have to probably pinpointing out the 12-year-old, the girl that's like, probably not the best. And it may be a one-on-one conversation. So I think having both parents involved, but I don't know. I think it's an individual parenting process, but having both parents on board, and really starting with the mom, if it's a mom and dad together, really having the woman start and be like, all right, let's have this conversation. But even there are some dads that are like, hey, isn't this thing starting? Like we probably, so they might be the impetus too, because they're going to want to know how to support their daughters. So
I think most dads want to care for their daughters.
Exactly.
I mean, I know my daughter certainly, I'm wrapped around her finger. But there's not a lot of resources. There's not a lot of information readily available. You can certainly hunt it down, and I'm so grateful you're doing what you're doing because you're filling that huge gap there. But yeah, I definitely agree. I think both parents should be, if at all possible, involved, certainly in the ongoing support from cycle to cycle and everything.
Yeah. And if it's normalized in the household, then it's not weird to have mom and dad both, like to have it, come up at dinner, or like something where it's like casual conversations, or a sit down where it's like, all right, let's talk about this, and just know that we're both here to support you, and so either one of us. Yeah.
So how do people connect with you to take your class?
On my website, so it's meredithashton.com, and the courses will be on there like this week.
Perfect.
Yes, and so they can sign up and take the classes. So it's all just like self-paced, and the dad's class is about 90 minutes, which sounds long, but it goes pretty fast. It goes pretty fast. And then the menstrual class is about 2 hours, and we go through all the things, the basics and the products and the spirituality side of it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. This was, I can say I'm a mom of a teenager, teenagers, but I have a teenage daughter and everything else, and I love that this conversation is changing. And I can say that it's like, and I also had brothers, so I'm like looking at this going, oh, well, no wonder I had like, it's interesting. I can now like reanalyze where I am and my life and go, I'm so grateful that this is now available. And I also love that this course is online. It's self-paced. It's something that you can do it and just gain greater access to yourself or to our children and how to support our future generations that really need this support and need this connection. And so thank you for providing a need that has absolutely been there and now is being taken care of.
Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. It's been so amazing. Yeah, so thank you.
Awesome. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And Meredith, we really appreciate you being here as well. So it's meredithashton.com for her website. Go take the course, no matter where you are in life, and start tracking your cycle.
Yes. Thank you.